December 1927. When the 15th Congress of the Communist Party opened in Moscow, 10 years had passed since the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks had grown from a clique of revolutionaries into a ruling party. The delegates came to discuss what to do with the power they had consolidated over the old Romanov Empire. At the top of the party, Lenin's death had left a vacuum which at first none of his colleagues seemed eager to fill. Lenin's idea was that no one person should succeed him.
The senior ranks of the party, students of the French Revolution to a man, were obsessed by fears that a Napoleon would arise, take over the party, betray the revolution. Just such a threat appeared to come from the flamboyant leader of the Red Army, Leon Trotsky. None of them realized, however, that the real threat came from the man in control of party records, the man they called Comrade Card Index.
Comrade Card Index was the nickname for the party General Secretary. His real name was Joseph Stalin. Lenin had said of him, "Comrade Stalin has unlimited authority concentrated in his hands. I am not sure he will always be capable of using it with sufficient caution." This was the man who now addressed the party as its undisputed leader. The tractor factory at Chelyabinsk in Siberia, a showpiece of Stalin's plan to modernize the Soviet Union. A plan that would transform a backward empire into an industrial giant in just 10 years. But the majority of the Soviet people knew nothing of industry. They still lived and worked on the land.
It was difficult to get the work done in those days. We didn't have any horses, just cattle, 2 bulls. Mother used to get us all going. Come on, into the fields. And off we'd all go, off to plough or to bring in the hay.
The coming of the Chelyabinsk factory changed the life of Elena Pirzhogina.
I told Dad I'm off to join the tractor factory. Where did you dream that one up, he said. Finish school like everyone else. Look, it's in all the papers. They're building an enormous factory.
In 1928, the working class, in whose name the Bolsheviks had seized power, barely existed outside a few major cities. Over the next 10 years, 17 million peasants, more than 10% of the Soviet population, moved from the land to new industrial cities like Chelyabinsk.
So we went off to find the boss of the site. He signed us up and explained, "You're going to be working on the foundations. See that mountain of earth over there? Well, the horses and carts are bringing it in, and the sand too, and you're going to wheel it round in barrows. How does that sound?" "I'll do it," I said. "I'll do everything." "Right," he said. "You live in tents for now, so get yourselves organised, and then we'll be putting you all in barracks." When we moved into the barracks, there were 100 of us in each one, people from all over the country. They were hard times, but we never noticed. We went to work singing songs.
Red Army officer Mark Makagun went to Chelyabinsk to lead the novice workers.
What can I say? It was chaos. There was misery, happiness and fear. Some were frightened of the machines. When you looked up at them, sometimes they seemed as big as a 2- or 3-story house. But we kept going, kept at it. And most important of all, we didn't lose heart.
Engineer Nikolai Bielov came from Moscow to help train the raw workforce.
They broke the machinery out of inexperience, even ran away from work. But we carried on, persisted, believed in what we were doing. And on the 31st of June 1933, the factory began production. The first tractor came off the line, and on it rode Mark Macagun.
Everybody who'd made a part of the tractor, no matter how small, was so excited about it. Where have they put it? They ran up to have a look. Oh, that's my bit. There's my part. There was such joy, I can't tell you. There were tears of joy.
Mark Macagun paraded the first tractor around Chelyabinsk.
As we rode along, the old peasants were crossing themselves. Lord save us. Others just fled from the noise. It was a miracle in those days, you see. A living miracle.
On the river Dnieper, thousands of workers struggled to build in record time a huge hydroelectric scheme. Stalin urged on the workers. "We have overtaken the capitalist countries politically," he said. "To achieve the final victory of socialism in our country, we also need to overtake them in the technical and economic sense. Either we do it, or we shall be crushed." Strict plans were drawn up for the way ahead.
The Soviet leadership believed that economic success was just a question of planning. The plan was a sacred text. It could not be allowed to fail. The party was convinced that Soviet man could overcome nature and create a new society. As one of their slogans proclaimed, "There are no fortresses the Bolsheviks cannot storm."
In the Urals, the foundations were laid for the world's largest metallurgical plant, Magnitogorsk. Its builders buried a tablet which read, "We, the workers and engineers of Magnitogorsk, have fulfilled Lenin's behest and have laid on the 1st of July 1930 the foundation stone of the first blast furnace." In April 1929, the party adopted the first 5-year plan for the modernization of the Soviet Empire. Living in tents, sharing beds in shifts, working long hours in appalling conditions, workers were directed to over-fulfill the already ambitious production targets set by the plan.
There was a special cinema in Leningrad. It was called the Chronicle Cinema, and there you could see everything that was happening. So you saw the Magnitogorsk, you saw how they were building. Workers were working. They showed pictures of workers working with bare feet, mixing the cement with something, and the music was playing, and they were singing, and the girls in red kerchiefs were working in the streets, cleaning up the streets with brooms. Everybody was happy and working. There was so much enthusiasm.
Western sympathizers came to marvel at the shape of things to come.
A big Russian airliner descends at Moscow, having as a passenger on board Mr. H.G. Wells. The eminent English novelist is warmly greeted by a group of distinguished Soviet writers.
To visitors like Wells, the Soviet Union seemed to offer a bright alternative to recession in the West.
I was here last in 1920, and when I was here in 1920, I talked to Lenin, and he said to me, "Come again in 10 years' time and see what we've done." Well, it's 14 years, but I've come.
Toolmaker Robert Robinson escaped the racism and unemployment of Detroit for a contract in the workers' paradise.
I never saw a people who were so imbued with the fact that they were going in 5 years' time, or at most, Stalin told them 7 years' time, to overtake and surpass the United States of America. The people were simply, in fact, they would come 6 o'clock in the morning instead of 7:30 and begin to work the machines. And when the second shift would come, they wouldn't let them work on the machine. They wanted to continue.
Two American trade unionists, Victor and Walter Reuther, came for adventure.
It was an exciting experience to see people with such minimal technical experience coming out of Central Asia or out of a Volga farm village and getting a job in a factory that is making automobiles that run, you know. This is a whole new world. It was an exciting experience for them and for us to be a part of it.
Foreign technicians like the Reuthers brought much-needed expertise to the Soviet Union. Modern ideas were also welcomed. The mass production techniques of Henry Ford were much admired. And often copied. The Gorky Auto Works was a replica of the Ford plant in Michigan, but with a few exotic additions. Every brigade of workers was expected to do its bit for progress.
I must say the tool room was a little slow in coming up with an idea, and finally someone said, well, if we could have soup spoons like they have in America that we could sterilize, that would be great. So we sent a committee to Moscow to buy some, and there weren't any soup spoons to be bought anywhere, weren't available. So they came back very disheartened, and Walter finally said, well, hell, why don't we make some, you know? We'll use some scrap fender metal, and in our free time, we'll build a die to stamp it out, which we did. And we stamped out enough for the whole tool die department cafeteria, went in there, and it was a day of celebration. They had the accordion player and the balalaika player, and they did native dances, and there were speeches made and banners painted, hailing this great cultural breakthrough. I must say, I looked forward the following day going in and eating with a metal spoon. There wasn't one spoon in the whole place. They all took them home.
The plan, with its huge projects like the Dnieper Dam, was directed by state planners in Moscow. But the great builder, Joseph Stalin, liked to put his stamp on projects in every corner of the empire.
This building is the Moskva Hotel. The architect submitted drawings to Stalin for his approval and offered him a choice of 2 facades. On the left of the plan was one design, on the right another. The plans came back with Stalin's signature across the divide between the 2 designs. No one dared go back and ask Stalin which he actually preferred, so it was built exactly according to plan.
The Moscow Metro was begun during the first 5-year plan. It was to be the most luxuriously appointed underground railway in the world, a shining example of what the workers' state could achieve. Its builders were the stars of the Soviet workforce. Their faces adorned posters. Their exploits filled the newsreels. This young woman was one of the heroines of the metro construction.
They sent me to work on access shaft number 3132. So I got there and began to look for the entrance. Nowhere to be seen. There were trams running up and down the road, tram tracks too, but no shaft. Ah, yes, the shaft, they said. You're going to build it. So we had to pull up all the tram tracks, build a fence around the site, and clear away all the stones with our metal spades. Then and only then did we actually start work on the metro itself.
We had our hands-on experience in the shafts. Shaft number 21 was a red gate. It was the deepest excavation there was. Materials were hoisted up and down in a cage. But the workforce and the miners, we all had to climb up and down by ladder. It was a wooden ladder which went right down through a deep well into the tunnel. As you climbed down, it got more iced over, more slippery. Little lamps flickered here and there in the gloom, and it was difficult to see where you were stepping next. It was so frightening, like going down into hell.
The first 7 miles of line were opened on the 15th of May 1935. Stalin congratulated its builders.
Благодарность ударникам и ударницам и всему коллективу инженеров, техников, рабочих и работниц метростроя.
We got so dirty, and we were such young things, small, slender, fragile. But we had our orders to build the metro, and we wanted to do it more than anything else. We wore our overalls with such chic, and those rubber hats, we set them on our heads cowboy style. And then there were the boots, huge boots. My feet were size 4, and the boots were 11s.
In Soviet Central Asia, Muslim tradition kept women veiled and at home. Saudat Shamshieva set out to liberate them.
All the women were asking, why are so many of us being victimized? Why not cast off our veils altogether, all on one day? So off they went, all threw off their veils, and that was the day the women in Samarkand set themselves free. Later on, they set up the Hujum factory, the silk-making factory in Samarkand. They eventually added a dressmaking workshop, and finally a factory, all sorts. But our first task was to explain to the women that if they didn't work, if they didn't earn their own money, they could never really be free.
Some men reacted violently to this assault on their holiest traditions. For burning to death a woman from his family who had thrown off her veil, this man was tried and executed. By 1930, the plan was well underway. But Stalin expected still more from the workers. He commanded them to complete the plan in 4 years, not 5. Targets were raised and then raised again. To encourage the workforce, stupendous feats of production were stage-managed by the party. This miner, Alexei Stakhanov, managed to cut 102 tons of coal in his shift. His quota was just 7 tons. He became a hero of socialist labor and gave his name to a movement, Stakhanovism.
Сегодня мы гордо рапортуем любимому вождю Иосифу Виссарионовичу, что шахта Центральной Ирмина вместо суточной добычи 900 тонн выдал на гора 1800 тонн. Наше слово мы выполнили с честью. Да здравствует великий вождь народа, наш родной товарищ Сталин. Ура!
Robert Robinson was working at the first state ball-bearing plant in Moscow when a comrade broke all production records.
He produced twice the amount in one night. The next day, he became a hero of the Soviet Union. He was given, just like Stakhanov, special privileges. among which was a 5-room apartment. Before, he and his family of 5 lived in a 2-room apartment. Now he was given 5. And within the next 3 months, he was promoted as the director of the 16,000 people in that factory. That's where I worked, all over the place. There were Stakhanovites working full speed because everybody wanted to have a piece of the pie.
The newsreels offered a vision of plenty, but the plan was not delivering the goods. Even the basic necessities of life were hard to find. Despite the promises, luxuries were unobtainable by all but the privileged. The workers' state demanded great sacrifices and imposed great hardships on the people in whose name it ruled. But the shelves remained stubbornly empty. The planned utopia had not been achieved. Scapegoats had to be found.
Politicians everywhere tend to shift the blame for failures and mistakes. During the 5-year plan, the Soviet leadership developed this on a grand scale. Their method was to mount a show trial of convenient scapegoats, a trial in which the evidence had nothing to do with the truth and everything to do with covering up the failures of the Soviet system. The Shakhty trial, here in Moscow's Hall of Columns, was the first great example, and Stalin pronounced himself well pleased with the results.
In 1928, 53 engineers working at the Shakhty coal mines were put on trial accused of sabotage and wrecking. The newspapers called for death to the wreckers. Even the 12-year-old son of one of the defendants demanded the death penalty. The judges obliged, and 5 of the accused were shot. The real explanation for wrecking incidents was often all too simple.
Even in midwinter, there were shipments arriving of very valuable equipment, and included among it was a shipment of drill rod, very expensive steel, and it was lying on the docks, exposed to the snow, and I don't know how many months it lay there as they were waiting for the building to finish. And some workers mistook the drill rod for concrete reinforcing rods, and hence it was used in the balance of the factory construction. And when the truth became known, there was a big public trial, and many Russians were arrested and sent off, I suppose some to long periods in Siberia, maybe some to their death.
British engineers were accused of running a network of saboteurs and spies.
Here we are, back again from Moscow. It is positively absurd, ridiculous, to think that such men would go out to Russia, take time and care and patience to erect machinery, and then for them to turn round and wreck that machinery. It's absurd. It's damn silly. Isn't that so, the Nordwell?
Of course it is, every word of it.
In 1930, another show trial opened. The defendants, engineers and other specialists, were accused of forming an opposition group, the Industrial Party. Their leader, Professor Ramzin, was accused by public prosecutor Vyshinsky of plotting treason with Lawrence of Arabia and French President Poincaré. The accused duly confessed their guilt.
Когда вся моя вина перед вами налицо, и я всецело передаю себя пролетарскому суду, как он найдет нужным вступить со мной.
Activists whipped up demonstrations demanding the death penalty. The daughter of Stalin's foreign minister took part.
We marched the streets with slogans, death to the traitor and all that. and were terribly worked up. Then the next day, there was another meeting, and they told us that the government has decided to commute the sentence, to pardon Ramzin. And I wept and wept and wept at that meeting because somehow, I wouldn't put it in those words, but I felt we'd been had. We didn't think in terms of Stalin, but just somehow that we were manipulated. Our feelings were.
The Moscow-Volga Canal. It is still an important transport artery for the Soviet Union. A monument to both human cruelty and human endurance, it was built by thousands of slave laborers, victims of the economic and social policies of Joseph Stalin. Pavel Panda, arrested in 1935 as a counter-revolutionary, was a member of this slave labor force.
Постепенно входило в наше сознание, что
Gradually, it dawned on us that our arrests were no accident. We hadn't been collected together because of the crimes we'd supposedly committed. The whole thing had been done with a purpose, to complete mammoth tasks in the cheapest possible way.
дешевым образом сделать такую большую работу. Именно, что это огромное сооружение.
It meant that the construction of this huge canal was done by hand, using cheap labor. There was no mechanical equipment. It was just like building the pyramids.
Slave labor by prisoners was to be the backbone of the Soviet economy for the next 2 decades. The first canal was the Belomor, built to link the Baltic and the White Sea. Its 300,000 slave laborers were managed by convicted engineers. This propaganda film claimed that the laborers were all ordinary criminals. Corrective labor would make them useful citizens of the workers' state. The canal opened just 2 years after work began, and Stalin paid a visit. The corrective labor camps run by Genrikh Yagoda, head of the political police, became the Soviet Union's largest construction enterprise. Like the rest of the centrally planned economy, slave laborers had quotas to fulfill. But it wasn't wages they worked for.
Система на канале принуждения к труду.
The way they stopped people slacking on the canal was very simple and very effective. They didn't have to use force. Everything revolved around the fact that the more you worked, the more you got to eat. There were 3 incentives to make us work. The first was the basic bread ration, then there was a hot meal, and the third was the extra ration for really hard workers.
И третье – это ударный зачет. А вот уже к концу дня, когда уже смеркалось.
I remember how, towards the end of the day, at dusk, the workers who couldn't fulfill their quota would trail home. They looked so pitiful, dragging their feet. You could tell at a glance they were goners.
Было ясно, что хорошим для них это не кончится.
They died by the hundreds of thousands and were buried in unmarked graves, like this one just 15 miles from the Kremlin. It was rediscovered in 1989. The sign warns that here lie the victims of Stalinism. They were only the first of millions.
The image of peasant and worker united is an enduring symbol of the Soviet Revolution. The Russian word for it is smychka, which suggests the closest of bonds. In reality, the political leadership despised the peasants for their backwardness and feared them as potential enemies of the revolution.
Pinchuki is a small village in the Ukraine, agricultural heartland of the Soviet Union. Like thousands of other Soviet villages, it paid the price for the forced modernization of the Soviet Empire. The new cities were full of hungry workers. The peasants were expected to provide for them.
Father would wake us before dawn. So by 5 or 6 in the morning, we were already up and about. And then all day until late in the evening, until darkness fell, we'd be working in the fields or doing something around the farm or catching fish for supper. We used to eat fish most of the time then. Couldn't have survived without it. And that was how our family worked, flat out. That was how we managed to build up our little farm. And we had the best-kept farm in the village.
Stalin believed these more prosperous peasants stood in the way of his plans for the countryside. They were called kulaks. Kulaks were the village moneylenders, innkeepers, and hirers of machinery. Stalin accused them of being class enemies. He declared, "We must smash the kulaks, eliminate them as a class. We must strike at the kulaks so hard that they will never rise to their feet again." The party was mobilized against the kulaks. Even its youngest members, the pioneers, joined the propaganda campaign.
We used to go to Young Pioneer Summer Camp to the village, and that was my first contact really with peasants. I didn't know them. And I couldn't understand why they were so glum, and they seemed to hate us. The harvest was very good, but we couldn't collect it because there weren't enough sacks. So we were sent to the village to go to every house and ask them to give up their sacks. And some did and some didn't. And those that didn't, we just put down in our round school children's handwriting, "He must be a kulak."
So who were these kulaks? Some party activists argued that a peasant owning 2 cows was wealthy enough to be classed as a kulak. Others said no, he must have at least 3 cows. People without any cows at all were sometimes classified as ideological kulaks. In fact, it was just a vague catch-all term used to justify the all-out assault on the peasantry.
The villagers of Pinchuki were in the front line. Olya Treshenko came from a family that had worked hard and prospered. Her parents were now denounced as kulaks.
So we kept a cow. We had 3 farm hands. There was the one milk cow, another cow, and a pair of horses. We had a plough, a cultivator, and a harrow, and they were ours. We owned them. If that was enough to call us kulaks, then everybody was a kulak.
In every village, activists like Stepan Olyenik in Pinchuki were mobilized against the kulaks.
I was already head of the village committee at the time and a candidate to the party. They just decided one day that this and that family didn't fit in. They had huge grain taxes slapped on them. We'd say, "Not going to pay it?" Right then. And that was it. They were labelled kulaks.
What did they do to us? They threw us out of our house, confiscated everything, those party people did. They said they were building socialism, so they robbed us of everything and created their socialism.
So we set to and dekulakized 70 families, deported the lot. After that, we went round a second and third time, but this time we rounded up less, about 30 families. That was because our orders for Pinchuki were to dekulakize and exile 100 families.
It broke my heart when they took away our animals, drove them out of our yard, the cows and the horses that we'd grown up with. that Mum had looked after.
Выращенные коровы, лошади, все дома выращенное у матери с отцом. Они целовали каждую корову.
Mum and Dad kissed each cow and each horse, kissed them goodbye.
Наступал прощальный момент с домом. Они
And when the time came to leave the house, they were religious, you see. They went down on their knees and they prayed to God to bless their house.
своему дому. Да. Трагедия была изумительная, конечно.
The whole thing was a complete tragedy. The work of 100 years was destroyed. That's how you should look at it. Totally destroyed.
Весь был уничтожен.
Men, women, children, the elderly, all were deported. Loaded onto cattle cars, they were transported for thousands of miles to the frozen Arctic, the steppes of Central Asia, the wastes of Siberia, to join the growing army of slave laborers. Few survived. The war against the class enemies, the kulaks, hadn't produced the food the cities needed. Now the party opened a second front. Activists were sent into the countryside to collectivize farming. Peasants were summoned to meetings and told to hand over their land, tools, and livestock to the state. All farming was to be planned and directed from Moscow.
We organized the rest of the Pinchuki into a collective as well, so by 1929 we had 3 collective farms going. They were called Socialism Reconstructed, Red Ear of Wheat and Komsomol. We had a slogan, Defend Collectivization, Liquidate the Kulaks.
On Soviet cinema screens, peasants marched off happily to join the collective farms and begin a new life as willing servants of the plan.
И, значит, поименно каждому, значит,
So they went through the village in alphabetical order, making sure that everybody registered for the collective farm. Nobody wanted to register, so we asked if we could think it over for 2 or 3 days. Just think it over.
обдумать, говорит, надо, все ли это будет. Ну, ушли.
Well, during the nights we were supposed to be sleepy on it, we went out and destroyed our livestock. Say someone had 3 cows, they'd destroy 2 of them. If they had 2 cows, they'd kill the smaller one. They destroyed their pigs and their sheep, smashed up their farm carts. Anything rather than leave it for the collective farm. It happened everywhere.
В колхозном хозяйстве. И таких явлений было очень много.
Villagers shut their doors on Soviet power. Nobody worked on the collective farmland. Nobody planted crops. In the winter and spring of 1930, the peasants slaughtered 30 million sheep and goats, 14 million cows, and 10 million pigs. The campaign to collectivize was in ruins. The newsreels claimed victory in the battle to collectivize, but Stalin knew the truth and suspended the campaign, for the moment. The peasants thought they had won. They took back their land and planted their crops. Half the collective farms collapsed immediately. But as soon as the harvest had been safely gathered, the attack on the peasantry began again.
They organised something they called the Red Broom. Young constables joined up, a lot of poor peasants, women activists, those sort of people. They went from house to house, took iron pikes with them and pushed them into the ground to feel for grain, cereal, anything. They looked everywhere, in our thatched roofs, in barns, in the vegetable garden, in the backyard, anywhere that something might be hidden. Then they took it all away, everything they found, down to the last grain of wheat.
In 1932, writer Lev Kopelyev joined a requisitioning brigade in the Ukraine.
There were little post boxes which stood outside the village Soviet. They'd been put there for denunciations. People were asked to write to say where food was hidden. They'd say in this or that stable, under the horse's back legs you'll find the grain. The ground is soft, so keep digging. Or in this and that pit, near so-and-so a village. Or in such and such a field, wherever. You see, it was daylight robbery. But we convinced ourselves that this was for our country, that this was a fight for bread, a fight for socialism.
Requisition quotas were raised and raised again. By the winter of 1932, there was no food in the villages. People were starving. There was nowhere to turn for help. The church, too, was under attack. That year, Stalin announced another 5-year plan against religion. The very idea of God was to be banished from the Soviet Union. This church near Pinchuki lost its priest, but survived. In Pinchuki, the new year, 1933, saw people starting to die. In the Ukraine, the famine claimed more than 5 million lives.
People were dying everywhere in the village. Dead bodies were lying everywhere on the streets and the gardens and the fields. We went to local cemetery, and we saw many people who dug their own graves. Some of them were sitting on top, on the sunny side of it, waiting to die and dropped into their own grave. There was a woman lying dead on top of a dug grave, with 2 children crawling over her dead body, sucking her dead breath, and millions of flies swarming around those children and probably her dead mother. And the smell was terrible of the place.
Hunger drove the survivors to the edge of sanity.
And I remember across the road, we call it Totya or Antiparaska, and my mother said she went mad because she was running in the street shouting to everybody. So today I ate Tolik, my younger son, and tomorrow I will eat Olenka, my daughter. I don't know whether it was older or younger, makes no difference.
In the silent villages, terrified peasants locked their doors. There were many reports of cannibalism. In Pinchuki, Olia Treshenko went out to look for food. When she returned, her child had disappeared.
I went looking for him everywhere. I ran round for 2 days. Then in the garden, in my neighbour's garden, I found his little head. Nobody said anything or did anything. I went off to the village Soviet. They said there was nothing they could do. Nothing.
News of the famine was suppressed. Even visitors like George Bernard Shaw were fooled. I did not see a single undernourished person in Russia, young or old. Were they padded? Were their hollow cheeks distended by pieces of India rubber inside? On the eve of his departure, he wrote, "Tomorrow I leave this land of hope and return to our Western countries of despair." Reports of the Ukrainian tragedy eventually leaked out. But another man-made famine stayed secret for 50 years. Kazakhstan, Soviet Central Asia. The Kazakhs were a nomadic people, traveling the steppes with their herds. In the late 1920s, the Moscow government decided to seize their pastures and turn them into a vast granary to provide food for the cities. But the Kazakhs and their traditions stood in the way.
They made us move to fixed pastures and settle permanently there. They told us to obey the government. Then they picked out all the bais, the kulaks, starting with the very richest, and killed them one by one.
A campaign was launched to settle the Kazakhs and transform them into grain farmers. The campaign was spearheaded by the secret police, many recruited from the local population.
We used to have meetings. They'd decide who the rich people were and go through them in alphabetical order. 2 cows from you, they'd say. 1 cow from you. Half a cow from you. Get together with him and his half, and that makes a whole cow. They'd tell them, if you don't hand over the meat, then you'll be put on trial. So they always gave in the end, even if they were down to their last cow.
The Kazakhs resisted. They destroyed their herds. Millions of the animals requisitioned by the state died of neglect. The government's grain-producing plans were a disaster. They were soon abandoned. But it was too late for the Kazakhs. A quarter of the Kazakh nation starved to death.
The NKVD's headquarters were here. Every day its officials would go around searching for food. They'd search one man, then another. Whatever they found, grain or anything, they confiscated. Times were bad for the poor as well as the rich. Like a hen being plucked, the Kazakhs were disintegrating.
The corpses we saw, they weren't Kazakhs from our town. They'd come in from the countryside, hitched a ride or walked here in the hope of finding food in the capital. They all died anyway.
In Moscow, celebrations of Soviet health and efficiency masked the real price of progress. Stalin did not pause to count the cost.
Жить стало лучше. Жить стало веселее. Когда веселее живется, работа спорится. Если бы у нас был кризис, если бы у нас была безработица, бич рабочего класса, если бы у нас было нищенство, если бы наша продукция не росла, если бы у рабочих и крестьян нашей страны не было такого хорошего правительства, которое заботится о них и считается с их нуждами. Словом, если бы жилось плохо и не весело, то никакого бусинского движения у нас не было бы, заверяю вас. Не было.
In 1989, this funeral service was broadcast by the television station at Chelyabinsk in Siberia. Thousands of bodies of people killed in the Great Terror had been discovered in a mass grave outside the town. This woman tells the Soviet reporter that she hopes to discover the fate of her parents, arrested in 1937. She says she and her brother were left to fend for themselves.
Я дочь врага народа и внучка врага народа.
Another says, I am the daughter and granddaughter of enemies of the people. I have never known where my grandfather is buried. I am the last member of my family who remembers him. Now I hope that he will rest in peace.
Тому, что теперь есть земля, могила, где можно поклониться.
Сегодня по всей стране земля открывает могилы.
Nobel Prize winner Andrei Sakharov was there to offer moral support. For years he had worked to expose the crimes of the 1930s. He says this mass grave at Chelyabinsk is one of many that have come to light in the Soviet Union. Each exhumation comes as a shock, even to those who knew of the grave's existence. A few did know the secret of Chelyabinsk. Yuri Gerasimov was one. He stumbled across the bodies in 1947 while exploring an old mine.
I went along the tunnel looking around. I'd gone about 6 or 7 meters when it turned off to the right. I took a few more steps and then there it was, right in front of me. A mass of dead bodies, bones, flesh, skulls, clothes all mixed up together, just lying there rotting. Being down there must have preserved them. They'd lain there for 10 years, but we'd opened the shaft and let in the oxygen, so they'd begun to decompose and were sort of shifting around. I don't remember how I got out of there. My friend Pavlik helped me up the last bit. What's up, he asked. All those dead people, corpses. Oh, them, he said. They're those enemies of the people.
The bodies were transported by lorry. One night, Mikhail Moseyev decided to hitch a lift.
When I jumped down into the back of the lorry, I fell onto something soft, dead bodies. Their legs were sticking out, naked legs. You could see the soles of their feet and their calves as well. They weren't dangling, but stiff, stuck straight out. So I knew they were dead. I got scared, so I jumped off the lorry. And that was that.
When the grave was opened in 1989, a team of archaeologists volunteered to excavate part of the site known as the Golden Hills. Amidst the bones lay touching clues to the identities of the people buried there.
We found felt boots laced up with straw. They were peasant boots. We found a lot of spectacles, which the intelligentsia used to wear at the time. So we knew the people lying there represented a cross-section of society. They were of different ages, too. We even found some children's boots. Altogether, we uncovered about 400 skeletons. They were in layers. So one group of people had been shot, covered over with about 2 feet of earth, and then the next group was shot. We opened up only 2 of these layers. There were more than 200 bodies in each.
At the forensic center in Chelyabinsk, police scientists are analyzing the bones. They hope to discover the age and sex of the victims and determine how they died.
All these remains have been investigated in great detail. Here's one of the skulls we've been looking at. It has a bullet wound. Here's the entry point and then the exit point. This means they were shot through the side of the head, like this. We've found that most of these skulls belong to young people. Their teeth are in good condition, and there's other evidence which indicates that generally they were between 18 and 30 years old.
The people of Chelyabinsk reburied a few of the bones dug from the Golden Hills. But none of the mourners will know for sure whether their loved ones lie buried here. January 1934, the 17th Party Congress opened with celebrations. The first five-year plan had been successfully completed. The party leaders helped to create the festive mood. One of the rising political stars was Sergei Kirov. At the Congress, delegates were to vote for a new central committee. Stalin was expected to come top of the poll.
I remember sitting there with my hands poised, ready to start clapping his name. But it wasn't his name they announced. It was a different name. I don't remember exactly who. Kirov, Voroshilov, or Kalinin. One of those three. But it wasn't Stalin. It shocked me so much that I remembered it for a long time afterwards. It was so strange. How could they not have chosen Stalin? And the second name they announced wasn't Stalin either. I think he came about 9th or 10th. I don't remember exactly. There was this sense of fear. Maybe it wasn't fear. It's difficult now to describe how we felt, but it took a hold on all of us, even me.
The vote was a turning point in Stalin's relationship with the party. He feared other leaders threatened his power. None more so than the man on the right being silenced, the Leningrad party chief, Sergei Kirov. Kirov worked in the Leningrad party headquarters, the Smolny Institute. 10 months after the party congress, an assassin walked into the building. His name was Leonid Nikolaev.
Nikolaev hid in here, waiting for Kirov to return to his office. He slipped out, shot him, and fainted beside the body. He confessed to the crime. Over the next few months, so did 500 others. Eventually, a quarter of the population of Leningrad were arrested in connection with the Kirov murder. It became the keystone of the edifice of repression which Stalin constructed to preserve his power.
Stalin presided over Kirov's funeral. Nobody knows for sure whether he ordered the murder, but he quickly turned it to his advantage. Under a new law, oppositionists could be arrested, tried, and summarily executed. In public, Stalin moved cautiously. He waited a year and a half before mounting the first of a new series of show trials. In August 1936, two of his oldest colleagues, fellow Bolsheviks, were charged with terrorist crimes.
Moscow, capital of Soviet Russia, is the scene of another dramatic trial in which world interest is being taken. It is alleged that Trotsky, the unseen prisoner in the dock, at present living in Norway, is the mastermind behind a great plot to smash up the Soviet regime by methods of terrorism.
The Moscow party chief, Lev Kamenev, confessed to the charges. So too did Grigory Zinoviev, once Leningrad party boss. The men who had run the greatest cities of the empire were reduced in court to confessing their guilt to preposterous crimes. When the trial ended, they were sentenced to death and shot that very day. This trial was only the first. Trotsky, in exile, listened to the radio reports with mounting horror.
Stalin's trial against me is built upon false confessions extorted by modern inquisitorial method in the interest of the ruling clique. There are no crime in history more terrible in intention or execution than the Moscow trials of Zinoviev Kamenev and Radek Petakov.
Ambitious party officials were quick to step into the dead men's shoes. Stalin made one Moscow party chief. His name, Nikita Khrushchev.
Товарищ, троцкисты зиновьевцы, которые являются прямыми врагами рабочего класса трудящихся, докатились до того, что они объединились с фашистами, объединились со всей нечистью, которая злобствует против первого советского государства, где господствует труд, где господствует рабочий класс вместе со всем трудовым народом нашего Советского Союза.
Stalin was consolidating his power, surrounded by men who owed him allegiance, but there were more old Bolsheviks to be disposed of. Natalia Rykova's father was denounced at the Kamenev-Zinoviev trial. Natalia feared the worst. She asked her mother what would happen.
And so I asked her straight out, Mama, does that mean they're really going to shoot father? She lowered her eyes and said, of course. So then I summoned up the courage to ask, and us too? Shoot us? I don't know, she said. But the fact that father was to be shot was clear from the start.
Rykov seemed doomed. But his wife thought he should make one final appeal. She saw hope in a letter another purge victim had written to Stalin.
When my mother had read the letter, she turned to him and said, "We should have done just the same. We should have denied all the accusations against us, too." And then he did the strangest thing. He turned to her, his face had changed. It was grey, unrecognizable. There was rebuke in his eyes. And he said, "Surely you've understood by now that it's all useless. It's hopeless, pointless. The whole thing would be useless."
No one felt safe from the purges. Even government ministers like Foreign Commissar Maxim Litvinov waited for the midnight knock on the door.
He never went to bed without a revolver under his pillow. And there was arrangement between him and my mother that if they came to the door, she'd give a special knock on his door, and he'd shoot himself because he didn't want the humiliation and all that. We used to play bridge into the small hours. Somewhere after 2 or 3, we decided they're not coming tonight, because he hated the idea of being found in his pajamas and raked out of bed.
Litvinov survived. But in the 1930s, virtually every member of Lenin's first revolutionary government was picked off by Stalin.
People were being arrested right and left. People were being swept away in the frenzy, in the hunt for enemies of the people. I myself, being a foreigner then, it was dangerous. like every other Russian, I too had to sleep with my clothes on, because any night they would come for you. It was terrible. People wouldn't laugh on the street. Everybody was sulky. People were walking like ghosts because of the fear. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring. They couldn't bank on tomorrow because maybe they wouldn't be alive or be there.
The citizens of Leningrad were a particular target. Stalin purged them ruthlessly in case another Kirov arose to threaten his power base in Moscow. In the summer of 1937, the beautiful northern capital played host to a record number of tourists. In secret, the terror was reaching its height.
I came to Leningrad in the summer of 1937. It was a particularly beautiful summer. Along with the other tourists, I came here to the Peter Paul fortress to see the old Tsarist prison cells. It's still a great tourist attraction, but as we walked round here in 1937, we thought this was a relic of the dead past. Little did we realize that there were 5 modern prisons in Leningrad, crammed with 30,000 enemies of the state, who would have been grateful for this comparative luxury.
In the Kresty prison, 16 people shared a cell built to house just one person. They were often sent to jail after first being denounced by workmates. She says, bandits are plotting to take away from the world's workers our most dear and beloved Stalin. She demands no mercy must be shown to the enemy. They should be shot.
During the meeting, we were forced to vote for the death of this man who was standing with 2 guards. And I voted, like everybody else. Everybody put up their hand, so I voted for him. I don't know who he is, I don't know what he did, but I voted because that was the situation. If you didn't put up your hand, you would be arrested.
A word out of place could bring death or imprisonment. In the Kremlin, Augusta Karlovich had to be especially careful.
People were afraid of prison, afraid to speak, and so when they were arrested, they informed on each other. I remember once, a group of us used to get together, sit round and play cards. Well, someone told a joke about the government. It turned out there was an informer there, a Stalinist. Well, he informed on him. And the man, the engineer, he got 10 years hard labour on the Volga Canal.
Youth organizations like the Young Pioneers encouraged children to inform on their parents. A 14-year-old from the Urals was held up as a model. Pavlik Morozov had denounced his father for doing business with enemies of the people. Father was shot. Pavlik was murdered by members of his family. But Pavlik's heroic deeds inspired witnesses like this young boy, Nikitin. Even today, the pioneers still honor Pavlik Morozov.
The state penetrated the heart of family life. This was a world where children were trained to thank Stalin for their happy childhood. The new moral code demanded that everyone put loyalty to party and state first. As a result, everyone lived in fear.
People soon learned the drill. After denunciation came arrest. One night, Tatiana Gomolitskaya saw her mother taken away.
At 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a ring of the bell, and I thought, oh, another search, all right. And it took a very long time. I think at about 7:30 they finished. And then he said, well, get ready to go, to my mother. And then I asked him, what can she take with her? And I gathered all the things that she may need. And he left with her. And I just fell down on my knees and started crying and said, oh God, why don't I believe in you? Because it was the only being who could help me. Nobody could help me.
In every city, the same routine was followed. Arrested prisoners were interrogated. At Kiev in the Ukraine, they were taken to the October Palace. Then, as now, it was outwardly a place of culture. Beneath the stage lay the secret police headquarters and the cells.
Когда я вошел в подвал, я поразился.
When I entered the basement, I couldn't believe my eyes. Everywhere along the walls were small, narrow cupboards, and they'd been specially constructed so you couldn't sit in them or stand properly. You had to sort of crouch. Those little cupboards had been specially thought out to torment people, so that after a certain time in them, when we were taken to the interrogator, we would already be completely broken.
In a cell deep in the building, methods had been devised to persuade Vikenty Grocholsky to admit to all charges.
In the room there were 4 tables. There were people lying on the tables. Well, I don't even know if you'd call them people. They were completely covered in blood. They were being beaten with sticks. Their flesh was raw, blood was dripping onto the floor. This was the torture room. The guard said to me, "Had a look. Well, if you don't want to end up here, you'll have to sign."
Trucks took bodies from the October Palace. On their way back, they stopped at the waterside.
We
parked the truck next to the lake. This one here, the Telbin. We opened up the back and pulled out the tarpaulin. I had a look in the back of the truck and saw that it was covered in blood. Thick, half-dried blood. I was shocked. I looked at Misha. "What's up?" he said. "I told you I'd drive enemies of the people." And he added, "But not live ones, dead ones. And I'm not the only one who does it. Lots of us do."
These woods near Kiev are one huge graveyard, for the purges were especially savage here. In the midst of the terror, a new constitution was proclaimed. It promised all the nationalities of the Soviet Union new liberties. It guaranteed freedom of speech. It recognized the right to demonstrate. It promised every Soviet citizen protection from arbitrary arrest. A coal mine at Vorkuta in the Arctic Circle. These miners earned 3 times as much as the average Soviet worker. But in the 1930s, this was a slave labor camp for enemies of the people. Today's miners travel to the coalface by train. Then, it was a 2-hour trek on foot. There were no machines for cutting coal. The prisoners used a pick or a piece of wood. Many had nothing but their own bare hands. The Vorkuta mines were part of the gulag, a network of forced labor camps built in the harshest places in Stalin's empire. At Vorkuta, temperatures of -50 centigrade are common. In the 1930s, the only access was by river from Archangel, 1,500 miles away. Where the modern town now stands, the prisoners lived in wooden barracks. Ilya Ilyin was one of them.
The food was awful, and the working conditions were terrible. There was no health or safety precautions down the mine. We were dressed in rags and had no medical help. People started to get ill, but nobody took any notice. So they fell ill and got more ill until they faded away to nothing. They were goners. I don't know about the other camps, but in ours, up to 21 people died a day. They dug trenches in preparation for the burials in rows of 3 or 4. They just threw the dead prisoners in, stripped of everything. They didn't even bother to give them name tags. I saw them doing it once. There was no bulldozer, so they just threw them in by the legs. How they fell, head first or legs first, nobody cared. And when they'd filled the trenches with bodies, they covered them over. And that was that. Now they've put up big buildings over those places, over those trenches.
The first labor camps opened in the 1920s. The economy soon came to depend on them. Slaves could do dangerous work like logging that few others would tackle. The propaganda films showed honest toil to rehabilitate unfortunate criminals. Prisoners opened up areas where natural resources were rich but expensive to exploit. They had to build the labor camps themselves. Flora Liebman was brought to the Soviet Union from Scotland by her mother. She married a Soviet citizen, but was arrested and sent to the camps in 1937.
The camps were dugouts, and the top was rounded up with earth like a grave, and a few steps out of earth you get into there. There was nothing on the floor, nothing. We slept in our clothes on the earth, on Mother Earth. Nothing. Cold, shivering, suffering, memories, and oh gosh, I don't know how people lived through that.
At Karaganda in Central Asia, Flora worked in a camp hospital preparing bodies for autopsies.
There was a built-in iron stove, and that was the usual Russian style. And we would put these corpses around the stove, standing up on the stove. I remember one day I came in to see how they were getting on, and they were defreezing, and one of the corpses started moving. I got so scared, I ran away, and I left the door open, which I got a reprieve because we had to warm them up again. A cart would come up with an old horse, and on this cart we would pick up these corpses, naked corpses, and put them on the sledges like logs. And off we'd go to the burial place, and that was just pits that we were digging in the summer. These were the pits where we buried the corpses. We just threw them in there. I would stand looking at these and think to myself, oh my God, these were human beings. They had families, they were living. Somebody's crying, thinking where he or she was. And here I am, just pushing them into these pits.
The camp hospital in Vorkuta still stands. Afanasios Venaris worked there.
We were slaves in the true sense of the word. We held on to the belief that justice would come. So we were optimists. We tried to keep each other going, and we were all still individuals. We always managed to have interesting conversations, even about the terrible things happening to us. We used to dream of eating well. That kept us going. I would dream that I was in a cake shop where I would try and eat as much as I could so I wouldn't be hungry when I woke up. I'm content. You have to accept your fate. At least I'm alive. Many of my friends are dead. I survived thanks to the hospital and thanks to good and kind people. They taught me that I'm a human being.
The man who ran the camps from 1936 was Nikolai Yezhov. His was the public face of the Great Terror. Yezhov was head of the secret police, the NKVD. Stalin stayed in the background. Many believed that he knew nothing of the terror. Yet he signed death warrants for thousands every day. At the 20th anniversary of the secret police in 1937, Anastas Mikoyan praised Yezhov.
Можем прямо сказать, НКВД своей разобщительной работой, раскрытием шпионской организации не только спас много жизней, которым угрожала опасность от врагов, шпионов, диверсантов, разведчиков, от крушений поездов, которые они организовывали, отравлений народных масс, столовых, водой там и всеми другими адскими мерами борьбы с народом. Заражение скота эпизодами, всякими болезнями, заражение людей. Вот в этой борьбе под руководством замечательного большевика сталинского наркома Чelyabinsk.
Like all Soviet workers, the secret police had to keep to a plan. Stalin expected them to fulfill their quotas. In Georgia, NKVD archivist Georgy Zyalidze asked his boss how well they were doing.
Я спросил, Христофор Сергеевич,
I asked him, Christopher Sergeyevich, I said, listen here. We could both die tomorrow, so tell me honestly, how many people were executed in Georgia? I can tell you, he said, 80,000. That's what he told me. And then he added, ironically, because he wasn't in favor of it all either, we overfulfilled our plan.
Tsialidzia stayed with the NKVD.
We were living a lie. I knew that, and I personally suffered because of it. My wife would say, what's the point in staying? Give the job up. But you couldn't just give it up. If you did, you'd be arrested. Once in there, there was no way out. But she'd say, you're always coming home in such a state. I'd come home in tears. I was a human being, after all.
Public displays of devotion helped Stalin keep everyone in his thrall. But children of enemies of the people had no cause to love him. After their parents' arrest, many found no one would take them in.
Mother's two sisters lived in Baku. They were both married. And they both categorically refused to take me in. They didn't even visit me in the kindergarten. But you had to understand how they felt. Everyone was scared. In Baku, everybody was frightened of everybody else. So you have to understand my aunts. I can't blame them for what they did.
Galina was sent to a secret police orphanage.
You see, people behaved very badly towards me. I was stamped as the daughter of an enemy of the people, the daughter of a traitor to the motherland. And I felt that. I understood it. I still feel it to this day. You just have to have been through it to understand how it was.
Ella Schister was surprised by a prison guard's attitude.
When the head guard was searching me, he said, no need to be frightened, I won't confiscate anything. There was nothing to confiscate anyway, only soap and washing powder. Have you got any kids, he asked me. 2, I said. Where are they? In a children's home. And your husband, where's he? Arrested. Good Lord, your whole family's been torn apart. And you know what I thought? This man ought to be treating me like an enemy of the people, and instead he's taking pity on me. You see, that's how twisted our brains were. But he was simply a good man who felt sorry for me. It just never occurred to me.
In 1937, the world was preparing for war. The Soviet forces plunged into maneuvers. The maneuvers were a success. The generals knew what plans to make. But Stalin's response was to purge the armed forces. The man who had organized the maneuvers was Marshal Tukhachevsky, hero of the Civil War. With Stalin, he watched the May Day parade. Soon after, he was arrested, tried, and shot. Most of the army's top commanders shared his fate.
The army officers were accused of plotting a coup d'etat. In fact, they'd done nothing of the kind, although they were the only group that could have resisted Stalin. For these men who'd brought the Reds to victory in the Civil War, to question the party's legitimacy was unthinkable. And that's part of the explanation for what happened next. The last of the three great political show trials began here in March 1938. It starred Bukharin, whom Lenin had described as the darling of the party, Rykov, former prime minister, and Yagoda, the sinister head of the secret police.
Other accused came from the far reaches of the empire. Failure to fulfill cotton quotas was one charge leveled against Ikramov and Khodjayev, leaders of the party in Uzbekistan. Khodjayev was singled out for bourgeois nationalism, opposition to Russian rule.
All that bourgeois nationalism stuff, they'd thought it all up. The cogs of the NKVD started to turn, and they concocted the whole thing. They started accusing anybody of being a bourgeois nationalist. So if you weren't Russian, say you're an Eskimo, anybody, and you happened to say one day, well, look, here I am, I exist. Then that was it. You were a bourgeois nationalist.
The film of the trial shows no clear pictures of the accused. Prosecutor Andrei Vyshinsky hogged the limelight.
Эти иуды, искариоты и Василий Шуйский поднимают теперь свой голос подлинного советского патриотизма. Теперь, я думаю, ясно для всех, что нынешние вредители-диверсанты, каким бы флагом они ни маскировались, троцкистским или бухаринским, давно уже перестали быть политическим течением в рабочем движении, что они превратились в беспринципную и безидейную банду профессиональных вредителей, диверсантов, шпионов, убийц. Понятно, что этих господ придется громить и корчевать беспощадно.
The verdicts were a foregone conclusion, guilty on all charges. Foreign observers were invited to watch the trial. British diplomat Fitzroy Maclean witnessed the last act of a charade.
When they were all being condemned to death at the end, they were filming it, and the floodlights were on the dock. And the man who was operating the lights let them for a minute get out of control. And this is in this very big former ballroom. And right up in the ceiling somewhere was a little window with black smoked glass, and the light shone directly for a minute on that. And we all looked round, and there, sure enough, was Stalin at 2 or 3 in the morning at the last night of the proceedings, watching all his former colleagues being condemned to death, which is one of the most nightmarish sights I've ever seen.
Strength and achievement through toil. These were the virtues the Soviets loved to proclaim in the 1930s. Stalin lived by them. The Great Terror had made him strong. He ruled supreme and unchallenged. Though it had cost millions of lives, this was his achievement.
The year of the Bukharin trial, 1938, is usually seen as the end of the purges. It wasn't really. It was just that the system had stabilized. The prisons and camps no longer needed filling up, just topping up. This is a new Soviet history book for schools. It says that by preliminary estimates, about 40 million people were repressed under Stalin. By my calculations, about half of these were executed or starved or were killed in labor camps. The Soviets used to criticize me for exaggerating. Now they're criticizing me for underestimating.
Young communist Ella Schister loved Stalin. Her husband, Raphael Greenberg, had different views.
Greenberg said to us over lunch one day, "You're all such kind-hearted fools, you don't understand what's going on. I'm telling you that Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, Rykov, Tomsky, Stalin will shoot every one of them. And you'll be brought round to the idea so gently that you'll end up voting for it." I couldn't stand such slander against Stalin. He was the second Lenin to me, so I threw a knife at Greenberg. Luckily it missed. He was a clever man, so clever, much cleverer than me. But at the time I said to him, "You've made it all up because you're against him. It's all just slander against Stalin." That's how much we believed in Stalin. After that, I knew we could no longer live together. Our relationship was so strained, it was awful. Stalin had come between us. And even though we had a close and loving family, even though we had 2 children, I knew that we had to part.
Greenberg was shot. Ella's second husband loved Stalin as much as she did. He was shot too.